The wind howled across the endless steppes of Central Asia, slicing through tents and armor alike. It was here, in this stark and unforgiving land, that a queen rose not just to rule, but to defy the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Her name was Tomyris. She led warriors who knew no walls, no cities, only sky, grass, and survival. And when Cyrus the Great, the most powerful man alive, dared to challenge her, she didn't just defend her people. She carved her name into history with vengeance soaked in blood. To understand what drove her, you have to know who Cyrus was. In the 6th century BCE, while Athens was still figuring out democracy, and Rome hadn't even begun to dream of empire, Cyrus II had already forged a colossal. The Persian Empire stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Hindu Kush, from the mountains of the Caucasus to the warm waters of the Persian Gulf. It was a world first, an empire united under one man's rule, and not just any man. Cyrus wasn't just a conqueror, he was a strategist, a master of optics. Unlike rulers before him who crushed resistance with brutality, Cyrus adopted a different approach. When he captured cities, he didn't always burn them. He allowed local leaders to stay in power, let people keep their customs and religions. He freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity, earning him respect across the ancient world. His famous decree, the Cyrus Cylinder, has even been called the first human rights document. But make no mistake, his kindness was a weapon. Respecting local culture brought stability, and stability made conquest easier. Cyrus didn't spread peace, he spread control, masked behind tolerance. And that control knew no limits. By 530 BCE, after adding ancient kingdoms to his empire like trophies, Cyrus looked north. Beyond the Jaxartes River, modern-day Sirdaria, lived the Massagetae, a nomadic people untouched by cities or kings. They were fierce, free, and led by a widowed queen named Tomyris. While historians wrote little about her early years' surprise, ancient male chroniclers didn't care much about women's backstories. What is known is that after her husband's death, Tomyris ruled by merit, not marriage. She didn't warm a throne. She led from the front. So when Persian envoys arrived bearing gifts and flattery, proposing marriage between Cyrus and Tomyris, it was no fairy tale. It was a thinly veiled takeover. If she accepted, her people would become another feather in the empire's crown. But Tomyris saw through it. She wasn't some provincial chieftain dazzled by gold and promises. She rejected the proposal with a clarity that shook Cyrus. The Massagetae would not bow, and she would not become his wife or his subject. For Cyrus, that refusal wasn't just political, it was personal. The man who had humbled entire nations was not about to be spurned by what he viewed as a barbarian queen. If diplomacy wouldn't work, war would. He ordered his forces to prepare for an invasion north of the Jaxartes. Tomyris responded with a warning. "Rule your people and let me rule mine," she said through a messenger. "You do not know whether your ambition will bring you gain in the end. I know you cannot live in peace. But if you ignore my counsel, I swear by the sun, Lord of the Massagetae, I will quench your thirst for blood." Cyrus, drunk on his own legend, ignored her. He pushed forward, building bridges across the river, dragging his army into hostile terrain he didn't understand. And then, he made his first fatal mistake. He listened to Croesus, the former king of Lydia turned advisor, who offered a plan rooted in arrogance. The Massagetae, Croesus said, had no knowledge of wine. Their culture hadn't embraced it. So why not turn that into a weapon? Cyrus set up a decoy camp on the plains, leaving behind food, wine, and a small detachment of troops. Then, pretending to retreat, he waited. Tomyris' son, Spargapeses, led a force that attacked the camp, overran the garrison, and, unaware of the trap, began to celebrate. The warriors drank heavily, unfamiliar with the effects of alcohol. When night fell and the nomads were deep in a drunken haze, the Persian army returned. It was a massacre. The Massagetae were too intoxicated to resist. Many were killed. The rest, including Spargapeses, were taken captive. When the young prince sobered and realized what had happened, the shame was unbearable. He begged to be unchained and once released, took his own life. The blow to Tomyris was devastating. Her only son lost not in honorable combat but in a trap. But grief didn't break her. It hardened into something colder than steel. She sent another message to Cyrus. This time, there were no warnings, only fury. "Bloodthirsty man," she wrote, "do not boast of what you've done. It was wine, not valor, that cost my son his life. If you leave now, I will forgive your deception. But if you stay, I swear to the sun that I will give you all the blood you crave." Cyrus didn't budge. He had beaten kings, toppled empires. What could one grieving woman on horseback possibly do? He stayed. Tomyris did not answer Cyrus's arrogance with panic. Instead, she summoned every Massagetae tribe, rallying them not with fear, but with fury. These were horsemen who had been riding since childhood, warriors raised on open plains where survival depended on precision, endurance, and cunning. They didn't march with the heavy formations of Persian infantry. They moved like shadows, riding light and striking fast. Tomyris knew the terrain like the lines of her own hands. Cyrus, for all his military brilliance, had stepped into a battlefield he didn't understand. The queen did not rush into a counterattack. She waited. She let the Persians settle deeper into unfamiliar territory, lulled into confidence by their initial success. Then she struck. What followed was not a battle of numbers. It was a clash of tactics, culture, and terrain. Persian forces, skilled in siege warfare and open field combat, found themselves constantly flanked and harassed by mounted archers who could strike from hundreds of yards away and vanish before counterstrikes could be organized. The Massagetae, unburdened by armor and rigid formations, turned the battlefield into chaos. Tomyris was no distant ruler giving orders from behind the line. She fought alongside her people, commanding on horseback, driving them forward with the righteous fury of a mother wronged. Her warriors, fueled by grief and revenge, dismantled the Persian forces with merciless efficiency. Cyrus himself charged into the fray, hoping to turn the tide through sheer bravery. But even the mightiest of kings cannot overcome hostile land, strategic inferiority, and an enemy fighting not just for freedom, but for the memory of a fallen son. In the heat of battle, surrounded by enemies who knew no fear, Cyrus the Great was struck down. The man who had toppled Babylon, who had once ruled an empire that touched 4 seas, died not in a golden palace or a glorious siege, but on the windswept steppe at the hands of a so-called barbarian queen. His army shattered. The survivors fled, leaving behind the body of the most powerful man in the world. But the story didn't end with his death. What Tomyris did next ensured that Cyrus's defeat would be more than a military loss. It would become legend. According to Herodotus, when the Persians were defeated, Tomyris ordered her men to find Cyrus's body among the fallen. When they found it, she had his head severed and brought to her. Then she took a wineskin, filled it with human blood, and plunged the severed head of Cyrus into it. Holding it by the hair, she is said to have proclaimed, "I warned you I would quench your thirst for blood, and now I have." This wasn't just revenge, it was symbolism, a message to every king and conqueror who thought ambition was reason enough to claim what wasn't theirs. She turned Cyrus into a warning. The wine that once tricked her son became the medium through which she made her point. His thirst for conquest, masked as diplomacy, had cost him everything. And now, his legacy would forever be stained by the memory of a queen who refused to be conquered. But like many ancient tales, the truth behind these events remains debated. Herodotus wrote his account decades after the battle, drawing on oral traditions and stories passed along by travelers. Persian sources, naturally, are less enthusiastic about the details of their great king's defeat. In fact, Persian records state that Cyrus was buried in Massagetae, his capital, suggesting that yet multiple non-Persian sources confirm the existence of Tomyris and her people, the Massagetae, and even speak of her victory. Roman historian Justin, for instance, describes her not just as a grieving mother, but as a sovereign who avenged her realm with purpose and power. What cannot be denied is that Cyrus died while campaigning against a nomadic northern people, and that this campaign ended in disaster. Whether Tomyris dipped his head in blood or not, her triumph shattered the myth of Persian invincibility and etched her name into the historical memory of empires. The consequences of this defeat were immediate and far-reaching. Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, inherited the empire but lacked his father's deft political touch. Obsessed with completing the conquest of Egypt, he neglected the growing cracks within the empire. After his death, chaos erupted, factions warred, impostors rose, and the empire nearly collapsed before Darius V's phased control and restored order. But the empire that Cyrus had built would never be quite the same. His death had exposed the limits of even the greatest power, and Tomyris had been the one to reveal them. As for Tomyris herself, history offers few clues. The same chroniclers who recorded her victory quickly moved on, their gaze drawn back to kings and empires, leaving her story to fade. Some traditions claim she ruled for many years in peace, her people finally safe from foreign threat. Others suggest that rival tribes eventually overthrew her. But no matter what became of her reign, her legacy was already sealed. Tomyris didn't need an empire to ensure her legacy. She had something more powerful, a story that endured. In a world where women were often erased from history, where queens were remembered only if they gave birth to kings, Tomyris defied every expectation. She wasn't remembered for who she married or what sons she raised. Though her son's death played a tragic role in her saga, she was remembered for what she did. She faced the mightiest empire of her time and delivered a defeat so complete, so symbolic, that it shook the foundations of Persian ambition and echoed across centuries. Her story also serves as a reminder that power doesn't always come from palaces or bloodlines. In an age where cities marked the heart of civilization and men wrote the rules, a nomadic queen who ruled from a tent with no crown and no court proved to be a force no one could ignore. She represented the raw defiance of a people who refused to be assimilated, who valued freedom over comfort, and who understood the terrain they lived on better than any invader ever could. Her leadership wasn't born of ritual or tradition. It was forged in the fire of survival, sharpened by loss, and carried forward on the backs of warriors who trusted her, not because they were told to, but because she earned it. The contrast between Tomyris and Cyrus is not just about East versus North or empire versus tribe. It's a deeper, timeless conflict, the push and pull between expansion and resistance, between civilization and what those civilizations often labeled as barbarism. Cyrus brought with him roads, administration, and diplomacy. Tomyris met him with mobility, instinct, and pride. And in that moment, in that brutal, decisive confrontation, the so-called barbarian triumphed. This pattern would repeat again and again throughout history. The Huns against the Romans, the Mongols against the Chinese. Again and again, sedentary empires underestimated the power of those who lived beyond their borders. Yet while names like Attila and Genghis Khan fill textbooks and inspire novels, Tomyris remains on the margins. No statues, no cities named in her honor, no dynasties that claimed her lineage. And still she matters. She is proof that history is not only written by the victors, it's shaped by those who refuse to disappear, even if the chroniclers try to forget them. Her image standing over Cyrus's body, holding his severed head over a wineskin of blood, is not simply a group sign actus. It's one of the most striking metaphors in the ancient world. It says that ambition unchecked will find its end, that even legends can bleed, and that sometimes justice comes not from thrones, but from the steppes. We can't know exactly how Tomyris lived out her final years. Perhaps she ruled in peace, her people left alone by those who now knew better. Perhaps rival tribes challenged her, and she faded into history, like so many forgotten leaders. But her story, as told and retold through generations, remains an anchor in the swirling tides of ancient memory. It warns of pride, it honors maternal strength, and it dares to center a woman not as a side note, but as the main character. There is something undeniably powerful about that. In a time when kings were gods and women were barely documented, Tomyris carved her legacy not through inheritance, but through action. She used no palace intrigue, no dynastic marriage. She faced her enemy head-on horseback, in battle. And when she won, she didn't seek glory, she sought justice. For modern audiences, her story invites reflection. How many stories like hers have gone untold, simply because they did not fit the mold? How many queens, warriors, strategists, and leaders have been footnotes instead of chapters? Tomyris reminds us that history is never complete. It's a living thing, shaped not just by those who write it, but by those who refuse to be forgotten. In the end, Cyrus's name may have been etched into stone, but Tomyris's name was etched into fear. The kind of fear that keeps empires from sleeping easy. And while his empire grew and collapsed and was reassembled by other hands, her act of defiance remained untouched. A monument not of marble, but of memory. Out on those vast Central Asian plains, where the wind still races over grasslands that have seen 1,000 battles, there are no towering statues or carved inscriptions bearing her face. But if you listen closely to the wind, you might still hear the echo of hooves, the clash of steel, and the cry of a queen who kept her promise, not just to her people, but to history itself.